Greetings and welcome. We are going to begin here today on our 10-minute painting of a large oak tree atop a field of flowers at the bottom of our sky with a large square-headed brush and a mixture of titanium white and primary blue acrylic paint. Now, I'm going to begin at the bottom of our horizon and predominantly work my way upwards in a litany of horizontal strokes. I'm being fairly soft with my brush to avoid a streaky aesthetic, and then I'm going to go back to my palette and grab another mixture of the same pigments, this time with more blue. Now, it isn't a dark blue, it is still very light, it is still white dominant, but it is going to act as a nice gradient and ensure that the top of our sky is darker than the bottom. What this is going to do, it is going to create a slight vignette, meaning that the outskirts of the painting are going to be slightly darker than the inside, which will ensure that the viewer's eye goes towards the center of the painting. The eye innately goes to the brightest point in a picture, and by having the top of a sky a little bit darker, we ensure that happens very naturally and very subtly. Now, as you can see, I'm blending the two in the middle, and if you're finding you have a bit of a grainy effect blending the two together, just incorporate a little bit more water on your brush and use a softer application of the brush itself. Then I'm going to take a primary blue and apply mountains to the bottom of my horizon. They're very far away, but as you can see, that was hyper vibrant and it made it look almost close to us. This is a question and concern I get very frequently when people are working on distant mountains. They say, how do I push them farther back? My answer is to add a lot of gray, as we just did there. The more gray in your mixture, the farther back it will look. And here I'm adding some additional mountains that are even farther away. They have more white, they have more gray. And the idea is that you want it to match the sky as closely as possible. The closer the colors and the values match the sky, the farther away your mountains are going to look. Now, with that being said, I'm going to begin working on my field of flowers, but before we apply our actual flowers, I need to apply a base. And this base is going to be done in a dark green. This dark green was achieved by using a primary yellow and a primary blue with a little bit of titanium white and Mars black. I threw in the two of those just to desaturate the color a little bit, as I don't want the base of all of our flowers in that to be hyper vibrant. I want it to be more subdued so that when I apply my flowers, they themselves are the incredibly vibrant piece of this painting and they really pop. Generally, the idea is not to make something hyper vibrant or hyper saturated, but to apply the natural color and then make everything else around it slightly more desaturated. This is a great way of keeping things in balance and ensuring you don't get something that's almost assaulting the eyes. With that being said, some of us love hypersaturation, and that's okay too. Painting, highly subjective. It's all about what you yourself enjoy. And I wouldn't worry about the opinions of other people and that sort of thing in that regard. Paint what you like, with the colors you'd like, in the way you'd like, and as long as you're happy doing it, then it's great. Now, exiting that little diatribe there, we're now working on the base of our tree. This is an old oak tree, which means it's going to have a very large trunk, and then it's going to expand in a plethora of different directions as it moves upwards. It's also going to look almost as if it has a number of knots within the branches and the systems there. So just keep that in mind when you're working on it and rendering that which you are. The colors here are a burnt umber with a mixture of titanium white and yet again Mars black. I incorporated the titanium white and Mars black to ensure that the pigment yet again wasn't hyper saturated, but it also thickens the pigment a little bit. Generally, colors like burnt umber, like primary yellow, primary red, even primary blue to a point, are more transparent in nature, whereas white and black are innately much more thick pigments. And so when you incorporate them into your mixtures, you ensure that they're less transparent and you don't see the background through them. You don't have to do so many layers. So it's just another little trick in your repertoire here. So now I'm actually just taking a medium-sized square-headed brush and expanding upon my branches in varying directions. When I want them to be smaller and still sharp, I'm incorporating a good amount of water in my mixture, which really helps with the cause, as if you're using a dry brush technique, you can render something that's kind of toothy and it doesn't look soft, it doesn't look sharp, and it doesn't look like it was well crafted. So if you're ever having that issue, just incorporate more water, just incorporate more paint, and you should be able to create these finer lines with much more efficiency and ease. Now, we're at the half point here, and it's important to note that the paint looks very bland, very flat, and that's because we haven't added any highlights or that sort of thing. Well, we're about to start doing that, and we're going to do so with the flowers here in the background. Now, flowers are almost like dots in the distance, right? However, when it's so far away, it's important to remember that they're all going to blend together, and the best way to imply that is actually through a streak at that far back area. Then I'm going to switch into more of a tapping motion with my brush here, and begin to apply this mixture of primary yellow and titanium white as we do foliage. Now, as I move forward in the foreground, I'm ensuring that my brush dabbing effects are much more spaced out, that they aren't so concentrated, and this way you see portions of the green underlayer surrounding other portions of our flowers. This is what's going to give it depth. This is what's going to show that our flowers have something underneath the green pieces and the grass and all of that. And here I'm being very selective in the true foreground of where I'm applying it, because I don't want them to be too dominant. I don't want too many flowers. You want them to have room to breathe. You want them to have room to sway and move and all of that. And that is only achieved if you don't apply it too densely. In the back, dense is fantastic. You want a full wash of yellow, as the colors will innately just blend together. But in the foreground, you do need to leave a good amount of room. With that being said, we are now going to move onto the foreground of our tree. I'm going to do so with the same tapping effect. For the record here, I am using an old square-headed brush. If you watch this channel, you know I have a true affinity for this brush. And essentially what it is, it's an old square-headed brush, but the bristles leaf off in varying directions. It gives it a very random aesthetic, and when you make a tapping motion, you make just a myriad of different little implications on the canvas. This is fantastic because it creates a very natural looking aesthetic for leaves, for grass, for anything that has a good amount of dots or impressions. So by doing this, and by turning my brush as I do this tapping motion in the air, I'm ensuring that I'm creating something that's always evolving, always different, and as opposed to drawing in every single little leaf and taking forever, we're able to achieve a great number of them very quickly, which is absolutely fantastic. It is a real time saver. My camera did cut there, not professional, I am aware, I do apologize. I don't know what happened. But in that, let's say 15 seconds, I just took a lighter green and I started applying it to the bottom of my tree and to the edges of my larger clusters of foliage. The idea here is that we're just trying to build up depth and layering and ensure that we have something that's voluminous. If you want to create something three-dimensional and render a really 3D aesthetic, you want a dark portion of a subject, you want a middle tone, and you want a lighter tone. And of course, the lighter tone is going to be applied where light hits it. So we have the light coming from beyond the hills in the background there, so it only makes sense that the edges of our tree, of our clusters of foliage, is brighter. It's also worth noting that they are more transparent as they aren't as dense, so more light is going to pass through them and illuminate them as well. Now I'm adding a bunch of bushes and other foliage and that sort of thing down here to the bottom right, And that's just because I wasn't entirely happy with the look of the larger base. Maybe you love it, and maybe it's great, maybe it makes sense. I didn't love it, so I decided to change that, and here I'm throwing in an additional branch. It's smaller, it moves out in another direction, makes the painting a little bit more dynamic. But that is essentially our painting at the 10-minute mark. However, last week I included an extra 3 minutes in sped up format just to show you some other ideas, and I thought I'd do the same this week too. So here I'm throwing in a couple of branches, then I'm adding highlights to the sides of my trees that are facing the light that is coming from beyond the mountains. I'm just doing that with a mixture of titanium white and burnt umber. Then what I'm going to do is take that square-headed brush and apply additional highlights to the base and the surrounding areas of my foliage. But really, there we have it. There is our 12 to 13 minute painting. And if you're new to acrylic painting, if you'd like to learn more, there is a link in the description to my ebook, Acrylics for Beginners. And of course, I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday. Thank you so much for watching. And above all, stay creative.